piles of fun. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
It's a fake.
80s Rockstars Revisited.
You Space Cadet.
All this and more coming up on this week's show.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello.
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 Have you had a good week?
I have, Dave. How was your week?
My week's been great. I haven't done much in the way of retro apart from one monumental task with Jason, which I will give you a hint on later on. It's taken up most of last week preparing for it, but it was very enjoyable. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, and closer to the release time, we will let you know more about it. Mm-hmm. What have you done, Chris?
Funnily enough, when this goes to air, I would have just been at the Perth Amiga User Group Gaming Day, our second such event. So all day, we just go there and play games rather than have, competitions and stuff like the main event. But once again, I kind of forgot about it last week. So if you're listening to this, you've just missed it. So yeah. I'm sure it was great. But what you would have missed was what I would have taken is I'm going to take my Trojan Light Phaser along with my A1200. I'm going to play some light gun games. So that's what you would have just missed now that you're listening to this episode. Sorry about that.
Now that's a training montage we need to see.
Oh, yes, with the gun and everything, yeah. With the Robocop slow walk.
Yeah, so how did RoboCop pan out?
Oh, that's still going. So that's one of the online high score comps. Getting much better. I've got to the one past the junkyard. Well, is that level 3? Does the shooting gallery count as level one of the levels? I don't know. But anyway,
into level.
Yeah, sort of into level. So I think the level I'm on is officially level 3, or it's level 4 if you include the shooting gallery. That's where I'm at, and about 140,000 points I think I'm up to.
When does it end?
Something like that.
Competition?
End of the month. So I'm not winning. I'm not even close because some people have got like 300,000.
So when this broadcast, this will be the end of it. So are you going to be top 10 in it?
I should be top 10, I think, if not top 3 or 4. That's generally where I'm placing in these. I do them because it's a good, you know what it's like. You don't know what game to play half the time because you can play anything, right? So getting into these groups and these competitions, this one's through OG Duffy, his YouTube channel and his Discord. And it just gives you a focus. And it's just, like I say, I come home from work and that's what I play. So, yeah, it's good.
I know what you've been doing in retro this week, Jason, but have you had time for anything else on top of this?
The only other thing of note is that the price of that Atari 7800 Plus finally dropped low enough that I was interested in getting it. What I didn't realize going in, I was like, there has to be an easy way to drop cartridge ROMs into this. Turns out there's not, but I will figure it out and I will dig my cartridge supply out of the basement and get that hooked up and start getting at it. So that was my main kind of acquisition this time around. There's still a couple of other acquisitions that I'm a little on the fence about, mostly because they kind of duplicate something I have in triplicate already, but that was kind of the first new neo retro console I bought for a while, so feeling okay about that.
I've got the 2600 plus version of that, which is the same thing in a different shell. Nice little thing. I think we should go on with it. I think we should get right into the stories because I think you've got a big one to start off. Well, Jason's yours is quite long, so we've got lots to cover this week. I have aspirations. I don't have enough time, and sometimes I'm exhausted and don't want to do anything but slob about the place, but I do have aspirations. And in fact, I talk about them on this podcast from time to time. I've got a loft conversion to get done. I've got a C64 to build from scratch and a Spectrum to build from scratch, a virtual pinball machine to rebuild. It still works, but it won't work when I start to rebuild it. I've got a PCW to refurbish and to play text adventures on. I've got many other things to do, and I will get to them eventually. And if I force myself to do them, it'll become a chore. So I won't force myself to do them. And they're mostly waiting on other things. I can't do this until I do that, and I can't do that until I do something else. But I'll get to them. Something else that I have aspirations to do is to sit down and read books. When I was a little kid, I read loads of books. I had a voracious appetite for them. But I find it difficult to sit down and read books these days. I've now got several books to read that I've bought in the way of retro that I haven't had time to do it. I don't want to go too far down the kind of the mental health and the mindfulness thing now, but in short, I struggle to sit down and read a book without thinking, I should be doing this, I've got that to do. And I'm not comfortable doing it. For some reason, I can sit down and watch YouTube videos because that doesn't seem like I don't know, that's I can just watch another minute, but not reading books. I don't struggle with audiobooks. Audiobooks are fine. I can at least do some chores around the house while I'm listening. Although, tell myself I'm going to do some chores and sit down and just listen to them. But audiobooks in our hobby are not plentiful. Podcasts are, I guess, and then maybe that's why we're as popular as we are, because people like to do things, there's chores on a Saturday morning, cut the grass, tidy the house, wash the car, or run a marathon while listening to us, as one of our listeners has done. I did just finish listening to an audiobook called Robots of Dawns, and maybe, Jason, you can tell us why I listened to Robots of Dawn.
Well, it might be because you are up for chairman of the Galactic Empire. It might be because we collaborated together to cover the 1984 Epix text adventure adaptation of that Asimov classic. At least one of those is true.
But I do enjoy reading books, and I'll get to it. An aspiration that I had as an 11-year-old was to learn how to program on my Amstrad CPC, not just in BASIC, but in assembler. Or machine code is what we call it back then. And I never did it, and I never will. But over the years, I did pick up a bit of BASIC, and I have done some Comal, and with a gun to my head, I couldn't tell you what I did with it. And I did do some Turbo Pascal at one point. And maybe if I tried to do some of that, it would come back to me. But I have accepted that as much as I would like to do programming, there are lots of other things that I would choose to do first. So I have to say, I don't think I ever will learn programming. I think that's when I have to say, unless I somehow get the real urge to do it, it's not realistic for me to say I'm going to get to that. So do you guys have any programming aspirations, or do you have books that you've not got around to reading?
I really enjoy, and we touched on this a little bit last week, Dave, but I really enjoyed messing about with BASIC. You know, we kind of had to learn it at high school and then sort of continued that at home. And then when I went to college, it was Turbo Pascal and COBOL I learned there. And then when I got into the workforce, it was HTML and ActionScript when Flash was still a useful thing. But all that, didn't get me towards my goal of I've always wanted to make a game. And in fact, that was my goal for this year, was to be more creative with the retro technology that I've now surrounded myself with, and maybe, try and live some of those aspirations. But like yourself, it's not really gone that way. But I think rather than programming, I would lean more towards something with a bit of a GUI-driven tool that could help me sort of, realize some of that, like starting with Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit. It's simple, but it's fun. 3D Construction Kit, and then getting into Amos. And funnily enough, when I dig that out and try and get into that's going to be a bit heavier. I plan to read the Amos tutorials that are in Amiga Addict. So, because I've got everything from issue 1, there's a whole series of tutorials for Amos, and I've purposely not read them. Do you know what? I can't remember who wrote them. But they look good. They look nice and easy to follow. And I've purposely not read a single word because I don't want to look at it until I'm ready to actually run the package and get on with the project. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm a lot like you, Dave, in that like I have kind of brute forced my way through some BASIC and Pascal classes in high school, but I'm really not anything that anybody would call a good programmer. Attempts to learn C, to learn 6502 assembly have all failed spectacularly. I tend to learn just enough of a kind of domain specific language or a scripting language to do something interesting that I'm trying to do at the time. I figured out how to get my way through the Infinity Engine gyrations you needed to do to mod that thing, which was both an internal scripting language and an external one.
That's, for people who don't know, Infinity Engine is Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 and Planescape Torment and so on.
Got Baldur's Gate 2 hanging around in the background today. And, I've done a couple of quick text adventures. I've threatened the other hosts of the Retro Adventures that I'm going to make us all collaborate on a classic style text adventure, either in the original Infocom Zill language or maybe in the new style dialogue, which still outputs to the Infocom Z machine. But yeah, the good news for me is that although I can't hang with them, for whatever reason, I get along extremely well with programmers. Some of my closest and longest term friends are some of the best programmers that I know. So I'm doing something right to keep up with them, even though I'm completely hopeless when they're having any sort of technical struggle.
Well, I'm finally at the point of this submission after that long preamble, and it's from Fiskit, and it's about a video on YouTube from 8-Bit Show and Tell. And I was in two minds about using this as a submission because I didn't feel that the actual subject had a huge discussion about it, but I felt it was really important to talk to people about. So in this video, Robin happened to be browsing on Amazon and saw an interesting C64 programming book. Now, he saw some red flags before buying it. Something wasn't right. He knew it wasn't right. But curiosity got the better of him, and I'm exactly the same. If I saw something like this, I'd want to buy it to find out why. And he bought it. And he found several more, and he bought them as well. Now, I will say what listeners need to know, because I don't want to spoil the experience of watching the video. The books are fake. They are plagiarized books. They've taken someone else's book, they've padded it out with some AI additions. So they're essentially pirate books. And what that means is that if you're browsing on Amazon and you spot something, and on a whim, they're about $20 American. So on a whim, you add that to your basket on Amazon thinking, I'll get that for myself as well. Maybe you want to treat yourself. Or maybe, more likely, I think, one of your relatives is thinking, what will I get them for Christmas? I know they're into the C64 and they've talked about programming. I'll just grab that. And they end up with a fake book on your shelf, a book that is worth nothing. And you may not actually get around to reading it. For all I know, I could have a fake book in my shelf, although I don't think I do because I always get them from recommendations or sources that I know are good. Now, I will say as well that these books have been removed from Amazon. I wasn't able to find them when I looked. But it does mean that you need to be careful. Buy from a reputed source. If Neil was here, he would shill for Bitmap Books, who do make good books, and he sells them in the Cave Shop. But this is really cynical. This is really, it's horrible what someone's done. They've taken a decent book, they've stolen the text of it, put an AI wrapper on the front and back of it, and then sold it on Amazon, and all 5 books were just a scam that way. So, any thoughts, guys?
Well, I assure you, and Robin is one of my longtime good friends who is an excellent programmer, but if you have written a bad book on Commodore programming, Robin will find you, and he will tell you that you are bad and make you feel bad and tell everyone else that you are bad. He has done it before. I have no doubt he will do it again. That is true whether you are, in this case, an LLM grifter, or in the old school case, just a nice grandmotherly type who thought she might help some nice boys learn programming. Come correct or do not come at all, or Robin will get you.
Yeah, he seems such a nice guy in the video. You've made him sound like an
red
ogre.
lines. There are lines you do not cross. And the Canadian shell drops and the gloves, the shell drops, the gloves come off, and it's on.
Oh. Robin, how can you call this man your friend?
I from almost 30 years of observation, I will tell you there are triggers and there are lines you do not cross.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I've been warned. No, I think these pirated books are fine, Dave, aren't they? I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we've discussed this many times, and it seems that the consensus has been that unless an item has gone missing, then it's not theft, right? Dave?
Yes.
If that's the moral standing with games and movies, then why not this book? I don't see what the problem is. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, but it does make you think. And, we do pick and choose. Yeah. Actually, my son Luke is publishing a book at the moment. So, knowing that this kind of thing goes on is not good. It's not good at all.
The video is linked in the show notes. It is an interesting investigation. And even though, it was obvious from the start. The title of the video says the word fake in it. So I'm not spoiling it by saying these books are fake. It was always from the start. It's still a great video to watch on these fake books. And I'm just shocked that something as niche as C64 programming, and I'm not saying that to put C64 programming down. I mean, it's an old machine. Modern programming takes precedence, you imagine, for people. So something as niche as that would have someone ripping it off more than once on Amazon. I mean, fair play to Amazon for taking it down, but what have they actually done, and what will they go after the people that did it, and will they stop them listing other books? Presumably this isn't the first time they've done it, so maybe Amazon is absolutely littered with this snash. I don't know.
We are sponsored this week by Addict Media. That's pixel.addict.media with Pixel Addict magazine number 29 on the way. We don't have a cover to show off, but we do have some scintillating bullet points. Issue 29 will feature a look at and an interview about the film Terabytes, the evolution of horror gaming. Steve Cooper will be looking back at his first PC and how Undelete saved his bacon. There's going to be an evaluation of the advantages of PC emulation. Is that on the PC? Is that of the PC? You're going to have to get the issue to find out. Roy Templeman takes a break for his Treasures series, this pains me to read, to talk about his game development for the Mattel Aquarius. Ugh. The main feature is all about Richard C. Hewison, whose career has involved names such as Telecomsoft, Mirrorsoft, and Firebird. It's going to be a great read. Where do we find that again?
Pixel.addict.media. And I should apologize to our listeners for that sponsor slot being professional. This isn't the way we intend to continue. We will not deliver professional slots. This is the fault of Duncan. You can blame Duncan for this, because we knew a new Pixel Addict was pending, and maybe Duncan will have the front cover by the time this goes to this episode is published. I don't know, but we asked Duncan what's going to be in the new magazine, and that's where this organised and coherent information came from. And it's also him who said that the Richard C. Hewison article is a great read, because Duncan, if people don't know, Duncan does a lot of the proofreading for there. He corrects people's spelling with his red pen. So thank you, Duncan, for telling us what Thank You Pixel Addict have done in their sponsorship slot for the next magazine. Issue 28 is out now, and 29 is imminent.
The year is 1983. You're driving a sporty import. You're on your car phone looking very important indeed. You must be a computer game developer. And odds are you won't be living this high-flying lifestyle 5 years from now. Starcade 2084 submitted a story on Imagine Software, and Pajako 6502 submitted a story about Sierra Online. These are both two storied names in game software from the 1980s. Now, Imagine Software is the subject of a short feature republished by the BBC Archive called Dawn of the Rockstar Coder. It was first broadcast on the 24th of October, 1983. It's presented by Mike Andrews on Riverside, which was itself a pretty new half-hour show featuring cutting-edge entertainment. In parallel to that story is a recently published Ars Technica retrospective titled Sierra Made the Games of My Childhood. Are they still fun to play? And that was written by Nate Anderson. In isolation, these stories aren't necessarily linked, but bear with me, back to Imagine Software in 1983 for a moment. Now, the Riverside feature makes Liverpool Games House Imagine Software look and sound amazing. Most of the people featured are 25 years old or younger. Absolutely nobody is even 40 years old, and it's clear that the 36-year-old game coder on the team is regarded as the old man. The premise of the piece, other than kind of building up Imagine, is that the entertainment habits of young men are changing. Imagine co-founder Dave Lawson tells us the male teenager who would traditionally buy pop records, he's now spending all his disposable income on computer games. And from there, the feature branches off to talk about how Virgin is also getting into the games business, which the BBC feature directly attributes to falling record sales, and how Virgin leads with an approach that makes celebrities of its game coders often in their mid-teens. Now, Virgin would last far longer in games than Imagine, but that's getting a little ahead of the story here. Before I go on, I want to do a sanity check. America, where I grew up, had its own flavor of hype around whiz kids and the kind of money that young people could make in computers. But I do feel like seeing features like this from the UK, that it was even more elevated with, and there were things like game charts on radio programs and such, which I don't believe we had. Were you two influenced by this level of hype?
Not for Imagine. This is a bit of a spoiler for people who haven't read the news since 1984, but Imagine flew too close to the sun, and just like Icarus, it didn't work out for them. So in 1984, I was not yet a micro owner. So this was just a little bit too early for me. As to charts on the radio and so on, I think that probably speaks to what we had maybe 10 years later with TV shows like Games Master and Bad Influence, where youth culture was merging with video games to try and have this edgy, cool 14-year-old aspiring to be 21-year-old TV show. I'm not aware of charts on the radio. I'm not aware of charts on the radio. That's not to say they didn't happen.
Well, they were being played in the feature. I mean, it's possible that they were trumped up, but it sounded like it was an actual recording.
I think they trumped it up for the piece. That's what it sounded like to me. Yeah.
Okay.
I do know that Imagine were almost certainly the first UK stars of game development. Game development, as people may know, in the UK was a few years behind the US. The US was just a little bit ahead of us on game development. We rapidly caught up in the early 80s. And the one that I remember the hype about was the Bitmap Brothers. The Bitmap Brothers from Xenon 2, Speedball 2, and all the rest of it, they were Rockstar coders. They were deliberately trying to be Rockstar coders. They were trying their very hardest to be as cool as they possibly could be in order to sell games. And their games were called Bitmap Brothers games because of them. They made a big deal about being the Bitmap Brothers, so they were riding the hype there. And I will say people knock the games because of the hype, but I'm going to say that the hype helped. The hype made the games better. Even though it's just a facade, it made you feel you wanted to play the game. It made you excited when you saw the names coming up. So yeah, I was a little bit influenced by the hype, definitely. Imagine, though, tried to be so big. I think John Romero ended up creating Imagine version 2 when he left id Software. And he ended up creating this ridiculous software house in this most expensive place to rent, and just this wild atmosphere, people sleeping under desks and having these wild aspirations. I'm saying aspirations an awful lot today. Wild aspirations of creating these games that were far above what was there before, like Imagine did, and it didn't work out for him either.
Imagine when I saw this piece coming up for this week, I actually had to remind myself what they'd even published. So maybe that answers some of your question. And the only two that sprang to mind were Target Renegade, which I spent many hours, happy hours, playing on the Spectrum. So that's a good example of one of theirs. And Game Over. Not because I ever owned or played the game back in the day, but I think we all remember the poster.
What's going on there in the bottom right-hand corner?
So this one, there's two versions, because obviously the cover art was quite controversial, and this is the easier one to get hold of, which was the later one, where they've got a screenshot, and I think some of them have a logo there instead, covering the, shall we call it, the nip slip. So
I remember seeing that in magazines, Amstrad Action.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it, and my teenage eyes were drawn to that against my will.
Of course. On that note, by the way, if anyone happens to be selling your Sinclair magazine issue 21, September 1987, or a copy of the game that hasn't been censored, then please do let me know. But yeah,
The game though has absolutely nothing to do with that, though. It's such a
it's worse than that, because neither of those games have anything to do with Imagine Software version 1. That's from after,
that's when after they were bought out. Yeah.
Oh, is that right? Well, there you go. Well, that definitely answers the question. There was definitely nothing from my Amiga years that stood out either. What did strike me about this piece, though, was the English take on what it is to be a Rockstar coder versus the stories that come out of Atari, shall we say. So the English version of a Rockstar is the fact that you're driving a BMW. I'm not sure if that makes you a Rockstar or a and the fact that you've got a phone in your car. Other than that, it's not that appealing. Whereas the stories that come out of Atari sounds like nothing but parties, getting stoned, not something I was ever into, and hanging out with hookers. So there you go. Very, very different.
Those stories are always, well, I knew it was going on. I was never at those parties, but yeah, I think that was going on.
There's a podcast which I make no apologies for mentioning because it's a fantastic podcast. The Ted Dabney Experience, one of the two founders of Atari, and they're always asking people from Atari, did you get into the hot tub? And no one has admitted it yet. So everyone seems to be behind the scenes telling you, it wasn't me, but that everyone else was in a hot tub, but nobody will admit it.
They all know it was there. They just weren't at that party. Yeah.
And I do remember a picture of the next one you're going to mention, literally of a hot tub with with Roberta Williams in it.
Oh yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Because they were heavily leaning on that.
That was part of their marketing.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So then, yes, the other side of this story is the Ars Technica look back at Sierra Online Games, who did in fact have a hot tub, which they did in fact use in some of their advertising. So this article and the grievances therein will feel familiar if you'd played like Sierra's King's Quest and Space Quest games at any point between their release and today, particularly the original releases, which somewhat awkwardly combined text parser input with real-time character navigation. Those games were hard. Some of the puzzles were unreasonable, not simply requiring you to learn by death, but to practically guess what the developer is thinking. I will quote directly from the article to kind of encapsulate that. Returning from my reveries to the conversation at hand, I caught Ars senior editor Lee Hutchinson's cynical remark that these kinds of puzzles were, quote, the only way to make 2 or 3 hours of game last for months, end quote. This seemed rather shocking, almost offensive. How could one say such a thing about the games that colored my memories of childhood? So I decided to replay Space Quest 2 for the first time in 35 years in an attempt to defend my own past. Big mistake. And it goes on from there. Now, in the big picture view, Sierra was very unlike Imagine. Sierra was founded originally as Online Systems. It became one of the early smash success stories of the American 8-bit scene. That company did a little bit of everything. Ken Williams, the founder and kind of lead developer, was one of the first people to really wrap his head around the quirks and potential of the Apple II's oddball graphics memory mapping to do interesting graphics and do things in ways that were repeatable and could be kind of made systematic. So the company pioneered text adventures with graphics around the writing of his wife, Roberta Williams, and a growing staff of writers. And Sierra also did well with arcade releases, some editions of, yes, Ultima, and other titles. And on the back of so many successful adventure game series, including King's Quest, Space Quest, Police Quest, Quest for Glory, Sierra lived well into the 1990s when it then got to go through the gyrations of being traded amongst various international conglomerates for the next 15 years or so. Their Wheel of Fortune seems to have finally come to a rest because Microsoft's acquisition of Activision means that Sierra, like so many other storied game publishers, is now a part of that massive Redmond content machine. The Williamses have bought and sold multiple very nice boats over the past 30 years, and although they have some issues with how things turned out after they sold the company, did I mention that they bought and sold some very nice boats over the past 30 years? So that exit is very much different than Imagine's was. Not at all long after that October 1983 BBC documentary, things started to go very badly for Imagine. So much so that the company was seized by receivers literally in the middle of a subsequent BBC film session. The link here is that both of these were stories about the potential profits and perilous pitfalls of the early 1980s software rock star. The BBC doc just puts it right out there with the nice cars and the high-end personal tech. Sierra's meteoric growth is well documented in Stephen Levy's Hackers, a book which I have here, which covers a 20-year span of computing growth and development in what I think is a very personable and approachable way. And although some of the figures in the book have quibbled with how they were depicted, Levy does clearly show the potential for being a young person with a decent amount of know-how and motivation to become an extremely wealthy overnight success. There are a lot of good overviews out there that track what went wrong at Imagine, both contemporary and recent. And much, if not all, of the problems seem to be the classic pitfall of not understanding that a pound or a dollar or whatever unit of currency you have that you get in revenue does not equal a pound or a dollar that you get to keep. One reference from the time said that Imagine wasn't doing its VAT filings properly, so sales tax essentially for Americans and elsewhere. So who knows what other expenses it was forgetting to account for down the way. Another part of this Rockstar parallel is that you think of legacies very differently when it's an outfit like Imagine, which lived fast and died young, versus those of Sierra, which was around for long enough to, frankly, start to become a parody of itself several times over. Imagine's output in the 18 months or so that they were publishing was not terribly sophisticated, and it promised to address that with unpublished releases like Bandersnatch and Cyclops, which promised mind-blowing hardware expansions. But we can talk about what the band might have accomplished if they'd stuck together, and much of Imagine's core went on to become Psygnosis, so there is some hint there. But there's not much career to go back and review. Sierra, on the other hand, I mean, they spawned multiple sequels for each of their successful concepts, some of which are still being mined today. Like there are still Leisure Suit Larry games. There are still Space Quest spinoffs. So is it a case of, the Beatles versus the Stones? Maybe it's more of one of those cases of the dying young 27 Club versus Tom Jones with his decades of output. Your analogies are welcome in the comments. Chris, Dave, did you guys tend to kind of internalize it and notice it when, not Imagine specifically, but there are lots of labels that flamed out at the time. Did you kind of feel it, or did you just go to the next thing and move on?
It's a funny thing. You'd think I would say yes to this, but the answer is no. You'd think I would be sad when Origin, they created Worlds, maybe my favorite software developers, the Richard Garriott's company. Their ethos was they made the games that I wanted to play. They created Worlds, as they said, and the Wing Commander, Ultima, wonderful games. And you'd think it'd be sad when Bullfrog went. That's Peter Molyneux's company, God Games and Syndicate and Populous and all sorts of things, or Interplay or Strategic Simulations Incorporated. But no, I wasn't. And that's because I think that when my favourite labels went, they didn't vanish at their peak like Imagine did. They stumbled and struggled on for a number of years, and I'd probably stopped paying attention to them when they finally went. I guess if we're going back to talk about bands, it's like your band had a few hit albums, and then they came out with other albums, and you didn't really like them as much, and you forgot about them. And then they broke up years later. Okay. So it's a funny thing that you'd think I'd be really sad about Origin and Bullfrog and all the rest of it, but I don't think I am. I don't think there's any of the ones that I liked so much that kind of disappeared at their peak. The only one that you could possibly argue about is FTL. FTL made Oids and Dungeon Master and Sundog, but they only made a few games and then they disappeared. So they didn't really. So then they were Dungeon Master to me, not FTL. They didn't have enough games for them to be something I recognise. So no, I don't think I ever had a time when a label or a publisher developer disappeared and I thought, oh no, that's going to be the end of that, because I think it had already ended by then.
I would be very similar to Dave, actually. I don't recall ever following a publisher like a groupie fanboy. If it was a good game, then I bought the game, not the label. Half the time I didn't even take notice of who the publisher was, apart from obviously the artwork on Psygnosis boxes stands out and stuff like that. And in my Amiga years, definitely the Microprose label. I knew if it was a game I was interested in and it said Microprose, then it would, it was like a seal of quality. But a bit like yourself, Dave, as well, I didn't notice when they were no longer there. It's just that I'd stopped buying their games, and so they just sort of faded into the background. So, yeah. Did you have a question for Jason, by the way, Dave?
I do have a question for you, Jason. This week, there were 3 submissions about old software houses, and the most upvoted one was titled Core Design and the Atari ST, but you didn't pick it. Why do you hate the Atari ST?
Because I yield ST content to the senator from Atari Stan, obviously.
I thought your excuse.
And you upvoting it with 8 alts doesn't count.
No, I thought your excuse might be they weren't a good example of someone who flew close to the sun and burnt out, because Core Design did the opposite. Core Design went on to success after success.
Yeah, I mean, just the boring answer is it seemed like more of a news and brief type of thing rather than a feature story. No offense to Core, just that particular overview. Perhaps there's a deep, toothy story. So I've already mentally noted, the Sundog reference. I think that's the first one I can think of, and now Core Design. So I will put those in the hopper if people will put more of their content in reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro for us.
I'm just winding you up.
I know. So even if you're like me and you're from one of the markets that Imagine didn't touch, like this side of the Atlantic, I think they were completely anonymous. This feature from the BBC archive is a recommended watch. Something that jumped off the screen at me, I don't know if you guys noticed this, the presence of several Apple IIs. You know, conventional wisdom has it, oh, the Apple didn't play a significant role in UK 8-bit micro scene. But whether it's for cross-compilers, which I think is very likely, whether it's for business software to run Imagine, so far as it was run as a business, I think that's also entirely likely, or some other option C, there are definitely several well-equipped Apple IIs on desks in those Imagine offices. Yeah, Dave.
I think, and I can't say this is definitely true, but my expectation is that through the 80s there was a number of development machines that people used. So they would use the Apple II, they would use the BBC, they would use the Tatung Einstein, they would use the Amstrad CPC, and then they would use the Atari ST as a developing platform to make games for other systems on. And you would do the programming on it, and you would squirt it to the other system through a serial cable, and the other system could then run the code natively so you could continue developing on it. And I'd bet money that they weren't developing for the Apple II, because of course they weren't, but they were using those as the powerhouse to do it on, because if you think about it, until you had machines coming out later, the Apple II would be the only really option for that because of the expansion it had.
Yeah, they were publishing for VIC-20, and Apple II would be an ideal platform to cross-compile, or not just compile. They're both 6502 based. I think that's very likely. So, there's something interesting lurking in these retro archives. Take a look.
Housekeeping.
It's your favourite part of the show. Is there any housekeeping to be had?
I'd like to welcome on a new patron. Thank you very much, Mad Dyer, for signing up to be a patron. If people want to become a patron, where should they go, Chris?
Patreon.com/something/thisweekinretro.
No. Patreon.com/thisweekinretro. It's Reddit that's got the R.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's Reddit.
Patreon.com/thisweekinretro. We will, I think, soon be doing a bit of patron content. So I think I'll be putting out the call for patrons to give us questions to answer in a Q&A patron exclusive. We'll be doing that because, unfortunately, there'll be a week when there is no This Week in Retro because Duncan is going on his well-earned holidays. So that'll be next month. One of the weeks won't be there. But we're planning to use the time, the three of us, to record a patron special, which will be edited afterwards.
Special public thank you to Deadlock, who compiles and updates the This Week in Retro show guide. Deadlock is helping me come up with an easy reference to past show titles and community questions of the week, so that if we're going to duplicate something, at least we know what we're duplicating. So thank you again, Deadlock.
Yeah, so if you're on Twitter or Bluesky, you'll see Deadlock tweets out this PDF index of the shows. So if you haven't been with us for every show, or you haven't listened to every show, no shame in that, of course, but you can use that to see if anything from the archives whets your appetite. Someone did ask if we could do a rundown of upcoming events, and apparently, if Chris is any example, no, we can't do, because he forgot all about it. We would like to do that, but I'm conscious that we mustn't take on any extra jobs to do that we can't maintain. I don't want to start something that then becomes a chore. However, thanks to the fantastic Rob Smith, he might have the cure for us. His retro.directory site does have an events section in it, and he is developing a new version of the website. So I hope that we can get something, with the idea being that we give you a quick rundown of what's happening, not very long, like a minute in the show, just what's coming up, to let you know about events that might be near you, and then direct you to go there for more information, which will hopefully stop Chris forgetting about Perth Amiga Users Group, which is happening today. If you'd like to go, I'm sorry, you're too late.
You've missed it.
Maybe next time.
And I'm an admin on the group.
For Shenmue updates, and maybe the last time we're going to mention Shenmue, there's a couple of submissions about it. Squelch 411 points us to a CBR article that shows the inevitable backlashes on. Shenmue heads a list of called Dreamcast games that aren't as good as you remember. And I think it's fair to comment on Shenmue being voted the most influential video game of all time, because obviously it's not. But it mustn't end up, and as Christoph indicates in a comment, it mustn't end up with us bashing it for fun. That's not good. I'm sure it's not a perfect game, but lots of people saw a fantastic game in there. And there are games that I love that aren't perfect. Most games, in fact, aren't perfect. So taking a game and pointing out the flaws in it isn't necessarily the right thing to do. Lots of people played it. It has lots of good memories. It is an influential game. So let's not turn into saying that because it isn't the most influential game, that's a bad game, because it's clearly not a bad game. And I think the internet can become very guilty of doing this thing where if something isn't the best, then it's the worst, with no in between, no nuance on it. So Shenmue is, by all accounts, a very good game, and it shouldn't be bashed. And I don't want us to come across as bullying it or people who had fond memories of it, because for a lot of people, it's their first open world game. On to news in brief, and G7 VFY links us a Register article on scientific papers from legendary codebreaker and father of modern computing, Alan Turing. They've been found in a loft and are expected to sell for around £50,000.
Also from G7 VFY and also from the Register, and no doubt inspired by me talking about DOS productivity software a few weeks ago, Microsoft has revived the old DOS edit and put it in a modern shell.
From none other than producer Duncan, we have a video from Gamers Nexus, and they're delighted with it. It's the sequel to Silverstone retro-inspired case, which was inspired by retro designs and originally an April Fool's joke. They've taken a modern case and put a retro-inspired front on it. 3 fake 5.25-inch drives, but they're all blanks, and there's a turbo button and a segmented LED. But it's a fan controller, not an actual turbo, and it looks like a beige beast.
Yeah, I really like the look of that. I'm contemplating if I want to use it to put my Pentium MMX 233 Voodoo 2 Orpheus 2 system in it. I mean, it is the perfect DOS system, and is this actually good for it? I've got a beige case for it, but this looks lovely. I don't think I will, because I think it might be controversial here, but I think the grille that's underneath those looks too modern, and the grille has to be there because this is meant to be a sleeper case. This is suitable. It's a full modern case. It's suitable for big graphics cards and all the rest of it, so it has to have that grille intake at the front, and I think that's what gives it away, is not being from the period. But I do love a segmented turbo display. I think that's the absolute peak of DOS computing. There's a video from Scott Manley, and what an accent Scott Manley has. What a fantastic accent. Warp 5 Ryan links a video from him on Voyager 1, a 1977 probe originally intended for our own solar system, which has now gone interstellar, and on attempts to debug the software on this retro probe in 2023, which I have put on my watch later list. Normally, Monday's the end of my weekend, so normally by the time I've gone through all the This Week in Retro submissions, I've got 4 or 5 videos to watch later on today, so I'll be watching that later on today.
He used to do fantastic Elite Dangerous videos, Scott Manley. He's one of my favourite channels.
How would you describe his accent?
It'll be like yours, Dave.
Yeah, great, isn't it?
Fantastic.
G7 VFY has been busy this week. Submits a video on the Next and Next Station from Fabio's NMI as part of a series on the computers that changed the world. This platform was fronted by Steve Jobs. It produced high-end workstations for years until being swallowed up by a desperate Apple in need of a next-generation operating system, which lives on to this day in the form of macOS and iOS.
Amiga Outrun Audio was not, it's fair to say, great. But Elk in the 1984 links us to a video from Reassembler, who has finished recomposing the arcade soundtrack for the Amiga on 4 tracks, and they sound fantastic. And I've actually been watching the progress of that myself. Very impressive.
I did submit a question on the YouTube comments, the guy asking if it should be listened to in hard panned Amiga sound,
you
or if
did
it should
not.
be going through in mono or bass MX. I'll report back what he replies.
Did you really ask that question?
I did really. Yeah.
Of course
Too late to get an answer in time.
Of course you did.
And Ro Anders submits Head-to-Head Atari Adventure. It's a site with a web-playable implementation of a 3-player simultaneous version of the classic Atari 2600 adventure game. The provocative part of this story is the claim on the site that this was author Warren Robinette's original vision, and that he had developed an Atari 2600 link cable that would make it possible to play on real hardware before leaving the company. Now, the site does acknowledge that this claim is only found in a yet-to-be-published book about adventure by Robinette, so we will keep an eye on this.
Is this one of those claims someone makes in order to sell a book thinking, well, nobody can prove me wrong, or is it true? I don't know. It's the kind of thing you'd want to be able to do, because I think that being able to play 3 versions of adventure simultaneously would be great. But 3 CRTs...
Cool. Even just the little, demo with the computer-controlled bots was quite a bit of fun. So I'm going to keep an eye on this one.
And if it's talking about a 2600 link cable, then it's not split screen. It's going to have to be 3 separate screens.
I'm trying to figure out how. Oh, okay. So 3. So is it going via the joy? I'm trying to figure out where the port is that you're linking. Anyway, yeah, interesting.
Maybe player 2.
Yeah.
The 2
joystick port, yeah. But interesting.
You can submit articles at our subreddit, http://www.reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. You can go and submit articles. You can read what's been there already. If you fancy finding something to do in a quiet 5 minutes, then have a look there. You can upvote articles. You can even comment on them. Go and have a look if you'd like to.
Actually, we insist.
Sorry. We insist that you go there right now. Stop listening to this podcast. Don't bother watching the rest of it. Spend your time on
multiple
Reddit.
Screens. If you are engaging with the show, you have multiple screens. You got plenty of ability to multitask.
Pajako6502 has linked us to a story on the subreddit on droidlife.com by a man simply known as Tim. Now, I'm not sure if Tim requires you to answer me these questions 3 before you can read the story. I don't think he does. What I do know is Tim likes a good game of pinball while laying a crafty log. And he can do that now because the story details how Space Cadet Pinball is now available for free on Android. Space Cadet Pinball, I'm sure most of us are aware, was a free game that came as part of Windows. Originally, it was part of the extra Microsoft Plus package for Windows 95, but later included with Windows NT, Windows 2000, and XP. Except that's not actually its origin. It was actually originally part of a larger game called Full Tilt Pinball, and Space Cadet was just one of 3 tables available in the full version, which was also released in 95. That's probably why, for me, Space Cadet Pinball always felt like a demo, because it actually was. And given Windows at the time, before this, had traditionally been limited to shipping with games like Minesweeper, Solitaire, and Hearts, this was a real step up towards real gaming being part of the operating system. Pajako on the Reddit post incorrectly refers to Space Cadet as the greatest pinball game of all time. He's wrong, of course, because that was Pinball Fantasy on the Amiga or the PC.
Which table?
The Ghost one. I've forgotten the names of them now. There's the car. I just refer to them as the car one, the Ghost one, and what was the other one? Like the money game show one.
The Funfair one.
Yeah. No, that's right. The Funfair one. Partyland.
Partyland was my favourite
from
Pinball Fantasy. I didn't like the game show one.
No. I like the car one. I'm trying to think because there's also
Ignition?
Pinball Dreams. Yes, Ignition. Yeah. That's how I've told you that story before. That's how my wife and I met playing pinball in my college room on my 486SX. There you go. But anyway, so that's why we like that particular game. But yeah, I've totally lost myself now. Where were we? That's the greatest pinball game of all time, Pinball Fantasies. That's right. If you think you can win that argument against me, then you won't win it against my wife for the reasons I've just detailed. Anyway, Space Cadet Pinball, it was an okay game, and it's an interesting enough table. And so I, of course, downloaded this as soon as I read this story. By the way, make sure you download via the link in the story and download the version published by Carl Sylvester, which is free. It's ad-free, it's DLC-free, and as far as I can tell, it's data gathering free. Disclosure, if anything does happen, it's not my fault. But that seems to be the way it's pushed out, because in true Android store fashion, if you search for Space Cadet Pinball, you'll be hard-pressed to actually find it. And instead, you'll just be hit with similar sounding titles that are full of ads and shady permissions and God knows what else. So, yeah, from the link provided by Tim in the story, I downloaded Space Cadet onto my cheap Nokia 5.1 while on the bog at work to test the suggested use case, and it plays okay. After muting the iconic sound of the table starting up so that anyone outside the cubicle didn't question what I was doing, it worked great. You have to hold down the screen, your finger on the screen, to increase the power of the ball launch, to launch the ball. And from there, you basically tap on the left side of your screen for the left flipper and the right side of your screen for the right flipper. The table looks the same, with the only issue being that because of my aging eyes, I actually need to find a valid excuse for taking my reading glasses into the bathroom for future gaming sessions. So, guys, are you fans of pinball games? And which pinball game would give you piles of fun if you could play it on the bog?
The thing that mystifies me is if you're going to replicate a pinball experience, in a handheld format, why not just go to the original, go Wildfire, go the LED pinball game? But Space Cadet in your hand is a Space Cadet in your hand is always a good time. I did also play quite a bit of Pinball Fantasies on my poor orphan Amiga CD32. So yeah, I have fond memories of those, and also had no idea what any of the table names were. But yeah, I think I rate them pretty close to where you guys did, and that's a very heartwarming story about you, your wife, and the 486 SX of love.
Yeah,
that's sweet.
Yeah,
I remember playing Pinball Dreams first. The Nightmare table, I absolutely loved that. I played it loads and loads and loads. There's actually a brilliant CPC conversion, which is it will, if you've got expectations about what an 8-bit machine can do, go and play Pinball Dreams on the CPC. It will blow them away. It looks tremendous in a CRT, but of course it's still not quite as good as the PC version, which is the one I played, or of course the Amiga version. I never got into Pinball Illusions, which was the third set of tables in the trilogy. And I get the feeling that they kind of ran out of steam by the time it came to Pinball Illusions, because people talk about Pinball Dreams and Pinball Fantasies, but not so much Illusions. I thought the second one they did, Pinball Fantasies, was probably slightly better than Pinball Dreams, although maybe I played Pinball Dreams more because it came out first. But having heard that story about Chris, How You Met Your Wife, I think I'll say that Pinball Fantasies is my favourite, just because of that story now.
Yeah.
I have downloaded this, though, and I will be playing it next time. I have a crafty log. I actually never played this much in Windows. I wasn't get the Plus Pack until much later, and I think I missed out on it then. I think had I got the Plus Pack at the same time as I got Windows 95, I'd have played this loads. But I will be playing this. I've got it now on my phone. If you go to the Play Store, you will find, if you scroll down and just look for the only one that gets a flat 5.0 rating out of 5, because it's not ad-riddled scrapeware like the rest of them. But yeah, I'll be giving this a go.
I've actually not used my phone for gaming for ages, so the fact that I was this excited by this and immediately downloaded it, I think speaks volumes. It's not Pinball Fantasies, no, but it's still better than pulling out your phone only to check Facebook to see how many people liked the comment you posted on a flat Earth argument 7 months ago. Bloody Space Cadets.
Is the Earth flat?
No. No, bloody Space Cadets.
Oh, question of the week. Is the Earth flat? There we go.
On to question of the week. And last week, we asked you what book was vital to your microcomputing enjoyment. And producer Duncan, came in with his own suggestion, and he said, the Amstrad CPC manual was an incredible tool for getting to grips with the machine. Take note, modern tech companies, there's no quick start guide here. And he's right, it's a great big thick ring-bound manual. He's linked to the CPC 61281, which is the one I had. That's how I learned to do BASIC from that user manual. It was more than just how to switch the machine on and load a game. There was loads more to it, and it made you feel as if you were embarking on a journey into computing. So that was a vital book for me. But let's have a look at what the comments were. I've taken us out of contest mode. And the top comment is from OK Leading 3496, and he says, Input magazines. Robert Crowther says he wishes he's kept his inputs, and Pajako comments that it's not as good as holding on to originals in your hand, but they are preserved online, and links to archive.org with details of all the input magazines.
And Robert Crowther also high in the standings with, my dad had a manual for the ZX80, not because we owned one, but because he thought home computers were going to be a big thing. And as a teacher, he wanted to get ahead of the curve. Having the manual without being exposed to the limitations of the physical hardware allowed me to imagine typing in programs, which was much less frustrating and with far better graphics than the real thing. Amen.
Nice. Prefim says the ZX Spectrum Book of Games by Mike James, in brackets, the Rainbow Invaders cover version, the BBC Micro user guide with the rockets on the cover, and of course, Osborne books as many more influential to those that were the input magazines. So many great coding examples in there.
Were the Osborne books in America, Jason?
I think they were. I think they were. And I don't remember if they were under the same imprint, but I do think that they made their way over here.
There's loads and loads of submissions here. Twilight Treasures for the Apple II. And the manuals, it looks as if for some reason, and I don't think when people bought a microcomputer, at least in the UK, they were looking at what the manual was, but for some reason, they put a lot of effort into the manuals, and the manuals were actually good, when I don't know that they made any money directly from that. I think that they could have got away without doing a good manual, but for some reason, honesty and decency made them do a good manual.
I think it was a bit of a necessity, because back then you booted the machine on, you were just met with a prompt, right? There was nothing intuitive about a micro.
You needed to convince people that they'd made a good investment rather than returning it. I think it was well motivated. Also, Ashamed Statement 79's mentioned a hardback copy of the Magic Faraway Tree. We used to wedge it just right under the power connector on our Specky to stop it moving and powering.
Brilliant.
And another Usborne shout out from Dog Cow to Usborne's Write Your Own Adventure programs. And there's a heartwarming story here about a hand-me-down TI-99 4A from Dog Cow's grandfather back in the mid-'80s. And it goes from there. Definitely encourage taking a look at that.
On to this week's question of the week. And what did we decide on, Chris?
We decided on which software house do you miss the most? There you go. Short and simple as that. Were the programmers in it Rockstars?
Or hot tubs.
Reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro if you'd like to participate in that. Thank you for listening to us this week. We forgot to introduce ourselves at the start of the show, so we can introduce ourselves now. That's just as good, isn't it?
That's just better.
And one of you is Chris and one of you is Jason.
That'd be me.
I'm one of those. Yeah. Anyway,
perfect.
I think we referred to you by name a good number of times.
Professionalism.
Chris is waving.
Jason's waving.
Dave's waving. Jason's waving. See you next week, folks. Goodbye, twirlers.
Bye.
Bye.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available for your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.